All right, good evening. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming to tonight's presentation on climate action planning. My name is Klapatch-Mathias, and I am here representing two of the organizations hosting the event tonight, including the UWRF Sustainability Office and Hope for Earth. And then, of course, our other sponsors are host of the River Falls Public Library. The next events in the Sustainability Speaker Series are coming up. We have one on April 17th, so this is Thursday, April 17th at 6:30 p.m., and it will be Rebecca Cole speaking on sex in the garden. It's a pollinator talk. And then on May 1st, we have Diana Alfuth presenting on climate resilient yards. Also coming up, we have Earth Fest, the biggest event of the year. For those in person, there's flyers on the back table. And for those online, you can go to hopeforEarth.org/EarthFest, and there's spots where you can download the poster for that as well. That is from 12 to 4 on Saturday, April 26th. And then we have a pre-event feature this year. Smoky Town Singers will be at 11 a.m. They're a drum circle from the Menominee Nation, and they will be performing again from 11 to 12 to kick off the event. So thank you again for either being here in person or tuning into our presentation tonight. We're going to mostly talk about climate action planning, what that is and why it's important for our community and what that might include. So I'm going to talk for about 45 minutes along with some students, and then we'll end the virtual component recording. And then the rest of you, there will be opportunities for engagement around the room. And at that point, I will explain all of the posters and everything that you see. So I want to start by sharing something I shared at an EarthFest planning meeting a few weeks ago. So I'm also one of the co-chairs for EarthFest along with Mike Noreen. And with recent events around sustainability, there's just been some turmoil and challenge and depressing times. So I was putting together some positive remarks to kick off a meeting that I'd like to share tonight. In a time when the challenges facing our planet and our communities can feel overwhelming, the work we do together is more important than ever. We are here not just because we care, but because we believe in action, in solutions, and the power of collective effort. Every step we take, big or small, moves us towards a more sustainable, just, and resilient future. Let's use this time to inspire, to strategize, and to support one another in the work that truly matters. The plan for tonight is I'm going to have some of the UWRF students share some of their climate stories. So these are their connections to sustainability-related work and things that they're doing that maybe they think are priorities moving forward. And then again, I'll talk a little bit more about what is a climate action plan, what's included in that, and then again, we'll end with engagement around the room. The goal tonight is kind of two parts. One, to educate our community on some of this work, and then also to solicit some community engagement and feedback around some of the topics that we're going to talk about and see really what does our community want us to develop in a plan going forward. There are those of us working on a plan for the university currently. Our first draft actually was shared yesterday. So by the end of this semester, hopefully the university will have an approved climate action and resiliency plan. And then also Hope for Earth has identified a climate action plan as one of their priorities for the foreseeable future. So we are not necessarily the organization that will be creating a climate action plan that will ultimately need to come from the city or the townships or the counties. So tonight throughout my presentation, I might reference community. You can interpret that in whatever area you live or whatever that might look like, but hopefully Hope for Earth will be a resource to whatever those organizations are going forward to create climate action plans. I also want to mention that the city said last summer that they would only pursue a climate action plan if there was enough public interest, and at that time there was not. It was not a priority for them at all. When they posted the position description for the Conservation and Parks Manager position this fall, it included in a list of many, many responsibilities, the development of a climate action plan. So that's a direct result of some of the advocacy work that was happening last summer and this fall. So we know we can have an impact. We just need to channel that and hopefully create some change. So we're going to transition into having three of the UWRF students share their climate stories. So I'll invite Anya up here.
Hello, I am a freshman at UWRF and a lifelong resident of River Falls. I'm majoring in environmental science, and this is my climate action story. I've called the outskirts of River Falls home my entire life. Over nearly 2 decades, I've watched our local climate shift dramatically. As a kid, I could always count on a big snowstorm each winter, storms that would cancel school, and they filled me with excitement. But those winters feel like a distant memory. In recent years, winters have been far too mild, with barely enough snow to ski on or replenish groundwater and soil moisture. The rest of the year seems just as unpredictable. Summers either plunge into drought or drag on like a rainy spring with torrential downpours. My family and I are fortunate. Though we live on a farm, we don't rely on it to make a living. Still, the wild weather swings have made caring for our land harder than ever. Cutting hay, once somewhat predictable, has become a very frustrating gamble. In dry years, the hay barely grows, often failing to bloom and losing its nutritional value. This past summer, the rain was abundant, but the constant downpours made it impossible to find a dry weather week for cutting and drying. Unpredictable storms would ruin even the best laid plans. Each time, we face tough choices: cut early and risk molding bales, or wait and risk losing it to rain. Wet hay can catch fire if improperly dried, forcing extra labor to break down open, wet bales and salt them. If we wait too long, the rain saps the nutritional value of the hay and we have to wait even longer to bale it. Despite our best efforts, both cuts of hay this past year were rained on. Though farming has always been tough, the climate crisis is turning it into an unpredictable struggle. It's heartbreaking to see the land that we love grow so vulnerable. This is a sobering call to act for our farm, our community, and for future generations.
Thank you, Anya. Next, we'll have Vinny up here.
Hello, I'm Vinny. I am a junior here at UW River Falls. I am a biology and Spanish double major along with a conservation minor, and this is my climate story. For the longest time, I never imagined myself as a biologist. As a kid, I was captivated by adventure movies like Indiana Jones and The Mummy, dreaming of discovering lost civilizations and uncovering ancient mysteries. I was sure I would become an archaeologist until everything changed during my sophomore year of high school. That year, I took my first trip to a state park. I had always enjoyed science and had a knack for it, but I had never really felt a true connection to it. Then, while hiking through Starved Rock State Park in Illinois, something inside me shifted. I stood in awe at the towering bluffs, watching the river carve its path through the landscape, and laughed as I held my umbrella underneath the rushing waterfall. In that moment, I realized I didn't just want to be outside. I wanted to protect the very places that had made me feel so alive. Nature is not just a backdrop to our lives, it is a shared sanctuary where we walk, swim, watch birds, and reconnect with something greater than ourselves. Go to any state or national park and you'll see people of all backgrounds finding joy and peace in these spaces. Our country was the first to create national parks, a legacy of preservation that defines us. Yet, that legacy is now under threat. Climate change is unraveling the landscapes that have inspired generations. Rising temperatures, unpredictable weather, and devastating wildfires are reshaping our parks, stripping them of their identities. The park I'd always dreamed of visiting most, Dry Tortugas National Park, is vanishing beneath rising sea levels. This island, home to a historic Spanish fort and a haven for marine life, is slowly slipping away. And it's not alone. The Rocky Mountains are losing their biodiversity. Wildfires in the West are more ferocious than ever. Our parks, once thought untouchable, are at risk. As I approach graduation, I feel the urgent need not just to protect our forests, rivers, and wildlife, but to ignite that same spark of love and urgency in others. I know that somewhere out there, another young person is waiting to have their own epiphany in nature, just as I did. But if we fail to act, they may never get that chance.
Thank you, Vinny. And next up, we have Ollie. And while Ollie is making her way up here, I'll just mention that Vinny got to do a trip over spring break this last week out to Utah and go to some national parks. So he got to do some rock climbing and some other cool stuff if you are interested in asking him about that. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Ollie. This is my last, hopefully, semester at UW River Falls, and I'm a conservation major with a double minor in sustainable justice and women's gender and sexuality studies. And this is my climate story. Imagine a childhood where the night sky holds no sparkles, no endless expanse of stars. Picture a world where children never witness the mesmerizing migration of monarch butterflies, fluttering in unison on their timeless journey. Envision growing up without the knowledge that coral reefs once burst with the vivid colors of life, reveling fireworks in their brilliance, now fading into dull memories. In my short 21 years, I've watched the world change in ways that weigh heavily on my heart. My college years have been a relentless confrontation with grim statistics and a deepening awareness of our planet's fragility. Sometimes it feels like the very air I breathe is too heavy as I imagine what the Earth will endure in 5, 10, 20 years. We live in a society that celebrates consumption at the expense of connection, a culture that glamorizes more while quietly erasing the natural beauty that sustains us. Our endless pursuit of convenience has overexploited the very resources we depend on, leaving us distracted by influencers and advertisements, blind to the devastation that we've caused. I don't claim to have the answers, but I know enough to feel the weight of the fear and the resulting climate anxiety that comes with that fear. Enough to hesitate when I think of bringing a child into this world that may no longer hold the simple joys of starlit nights. When I share this fear, people often dismiss it. They tell me I'll change my mind, that it's human nature to want to nurture. But they don't see what I see, that it's nature itself that I must nurture. It's the trees, the flowers, the pollinators, and the whisper of the winds through untouched forests that call to me. This isn't just my duty, it's my calling, and it's one we should all share if only we can just stop and listen. Thank you.
I'm fortunate enough to work with these students and many others every day, and I thoroughly enjoy working with them. But these stories and these conversations are things that we are having more and more regularly with concerns about the future. And it's not just the students that work in the sustainability office. I realize that might be a skewed sample, but there are a lot of UWRF students and others that continue to have these conversations. So I invite you all to think about, what is your personal connection to climate? We likely all have one. For me, I didn't put together an eloquent climate story like the students did, but I remember in 3rd grade learning about the hole in the ozone layer and having nightmares. I was involved in the Boy Scouts growing up, and I'm an Eagle Scout, and for many, many years, camping and being out in nature was a regular part of my life. I didn't know back then that I had an interest in conservation and sustainability. That kind of developed later on, and I'm thankful for the path that I took to get there. But now I see how my business background and other experiences are all coming together in this need to care for the planet. So I want to pose a few questions to you. Have you experienced or observed a climate-related impact in your life or your work? Can you think of a story or example? And how do you see climate change affecting our community now and in the future? Something called all of you to be here tonight. So what drives you to want to be a part of this conversation, to learn more about climate action planning, and to hopefully be a part of those solutions going forward? I think it's important that we all ponder those responses and wonder why we are interested in doing this work, and then seeing the community around us that also wants to do this same work. I'm going to transition into talking about some local impacts of climate change, because it is already here and it is already affecting things in River Falls. This is a picture taken on campus. What you see here is actually a parking lot, and just on the far end of the picture is the bridge by the amphitheater that leads ultimately out to the Falcon Center. So that bridge is underwater. If we really zoomed in, you could just see a railing right there. But this entire parking lot is underwater. Usually that's full of cars. It is not uncommon for us to have to send out alerts to students who park in that lot and suggest that they move their vehicles. I also had pictures of floods that were up past people's car doors who had not moved them. This happens regularly, every few years on our campus. This specifically was the flood of 2020, and this also created damage to infrastructure here in River Falls, including the Powell Avenue Bridge. The hailstorm of September 2022 damaged over 100 vehicles on campus, student vehicles, employee vehicles, and university vehicles. Here's just a couple pictures of some of the damage that was done. It also did damage to our campus greenhouse, which took over a year to get replaced for the sections of the roof that had holes in it. It also had quite a bit of damage to houses in River Falls. Many, many houses in River Falls had to have their roofs replaced, including mine. It spanned several different neighborhoods in River Falls, and this ultimately drives insurance costs up and creates more challenges for our community. Thanks to Kevin Juneau, who's here in the room, I have these pictures of trees that came down here on campus over the last few years. So the photo on the left is, it came down in a storm in December 2021. It was a 140-year-old Norway spruce. And the one on the right just came down in August of 2024 due to extreme wind. This is kind of directly across from Mariachi Loco on campus. We do have some efforts here in our community related to climate action planning already. So as I mentioned, UW River Falls is currently working on a climate action and resiliency plan. We've been doing stakeholder engagement for many months. Really, this work started last academic year. So for over a year and a half, we've been engaging the campus community as well as the broader community in feedback around what are people most concerned about with climate change and what can we do to address those concerns and work together in our community. So again, hopefully by the end of the semester, we will have an approved plan that will be available. Hope for Earth, as I mentioned, also prioritized climate action planning for that organization for the foreseeable future. And one of the things that was connected through both the UWRF and Hope for Earth efforts was a connection with the Metropolitan Council of Minnesota. So both Pierce and St. Croix counties are part of the Twin Cities metropolitan area. And when the state of Wisconsin is working on their climate action plan, both Pierce and St. Croix counties opted into the Met Council's climate action plan. So the Met Council, usually I believe it's 7 or 9 counties, and now it's 11 or 13. They're doing this feedback and getting stakeholder engagement, trying to educate people on what does a climate action plan look like, and then also soliciting feedback for how they can work that all into a plan related to the Twin Cities metropolitan area. As part of that work, they created an opportunity to connect with nonprofits in those counties to be able to do what's called a community climate collaboration. So this ended a few weeks ago. We had 18 people in our community participate in a series of 3 workshops related to climate action planning. They provided some presentations similar to what I'm doing tonight with some different pieces of climate action planning and focusing in on some specific sectors. And then through that, all the participants also conducted community interviews to get feedback from, again, our community to see what should we prioritize most. We will be getting a report from the Met Council in hopefully the next 30 days. We're about 30 days out from the last workshop, and they said 30 to 60 days. So they will synthesize all of those interview results as well as the broader workshops and give us that report to guide our next efforts. Tomorrow night, those of us that participated in the Met Council are actually having a debrief event to talk about that experience and how we might want to channel that work going forward and what that might look like for our community. So we've had some great work around that, and I think that will just continue to expand, and there will be more opportunities for involvement going forward. As part of all of this work, we also connected with some classes on campus, one of which being ESM 220, and they are working on some projects both last semester and this semester. They created some infographics around climate action planning, which will be available here later, and then also some climate action plan posters. So basically creating some of the content that we need to be able to understand the different components of climate change. Those students in those classes, and then also students in the sustainability office and some community members have done kind of an extensive lit review, looking at different resources and options, including the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change 6th Report, the U.S. 5th National Assessment, the Wisconsin Initiative on Climate Change Impacts, their 2011 and 2021 reports, Wisconsin State Executive Orders 38 and 52, the Wisconsin Clean Energy Plan, the Wisconsin Governor's Task Force on Climate Change report, and then we've also looked at over a dozen other colleges and universities and area communities in Minnesota and Wisconsin to see what has been developed for climate action in those areas as well. So we have an abundance of information about what are the international, national, and state policies and guidelines, as well as what other communities are doing in those areas. So to get into that, I'm going to start transitioning to what actually is a climate action plan, because that's why many of you are here tonight. So a climate action and resiliency plan is a framework document for measuring, tracking, and reducing greenhouse gas emissions and adopting climate mitigation, adaptation, and resiliency measures. So it often includes things related to buildings, energy, transportation, zero waste initiatives, water resources, ecosystems, food access, and air quality. And again, as I proceed in this next section, I might mention campus or the community or the city. If you're here from a township or something else, it could be crafted to whatever organization you're interested in hopefully advocating for. So the key components of a climate action plan include a greenhouse gas emissions inventory, and this measures our sources of emissions from things, again, like transportations, buildings, and waste. And on the next slide, I'll talk a little bit more about what those different emissions look like, including our scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. It also includes reduction goals and strategies. So these could be targets such as carbon neutrality or net zero by things like 2040 or 2050, and strategies such as renewable energy, electrification, and energy efficiency. Then we'll talk a little bit more about adaptation and resiliency strategies, and some examples of these are flood mitigation, heat adaptation, emergency preparedness. And lastly, there are opportunities for community and economic benefits from climate action and resiliency planning and some of the work that could come through with this, including job creation, cost savings, public health, and disaster risk reduction. So doing a deeper dive into our greenhouse gas emissions are often referred to as three different scopes, scope 1, 2, and 3. Scope 1 emissions are direct greenhouse gas emissions from sources that result from burning fossil fuels on site, so on campus or in a community, or in vehicles and equipment. So this could include things like natural gas, propane, or fuel oil burned for heating, or gasoline or diesel used for vehicles and equipment. Scope 1 emissions are important because they are under direct local control usually. They are easier to regulate and reduce. They are also often the largest source of emissions in many communities, especially from building energy use and transportation. Strategies like transitioning to electric vehicles, improving building efficiency, and capturing methane can significantly reduce Scope 1 emissions. Scope 2 emissions are indirect greenhouse gas emissions from the purchase of electricity, steam, heating, or cooling. These emissions often occur outside of the community, so things that are a little bit less under our control, but they are counted as part of the community's carbon footprint because the energy is used within the community. Examples of Scope 2 emissions include electricity use for municipal and community buildings, as well as for residential and commercial buildings. Scope 2 emissions are largely dependent on the local energy mix. So if we looked at that through River Falls Municipal Utilities, it'd be how much of their energy is sourced from renewable energy such as solar, wind, or hydro versus traditional fossil fuels. Scope 2 emissions, opportunities for reducing Scope 2 emissions include increasing renewable energy adoption and implementing energy efficiency measures such as LED lighting and building retrofits. Scope 3 emissions are indirect greenhouse gas emissions that come from sources not owned or directly controlled by the city or campus or community. These include emissions from supply chains, travel, waste, and consumption. They are harder to measure, and even speaking for campus, we don't measure all of these areas. We do an annual greenhouse gas inventory report capturing Scope 1 and 2 and some Scope 3, but we don't always have the capacity or data available to track all of the purchasing and all of the things like that that might go into it. Again, these are often difficult to control directly since they depend on consumer choices and external businesses as well. Reduction strategies include expanding public transit, biking and walking infrastructure, supporting local food systems, and working with businesses and institutions to adopt sustainable procurement policies. And lastly, encouraging zero waste and circular economy practices. I've used a few terms already, so I want to just step back and define those. Mitigation refers to actions and policies aimed at reducing or preventing the emissions of greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere, as well as enhancing the capacity of ecosystems to absorb these gases. Mitigation strategies are crucial in addressing the underlying causes of climate change and minimizing its impacts on the environment, human health, and economies. Adaptation refers to measures and actions taken to adjust or prepare for the impacts of climate change on natural and human systems. So even if we mitigated and reduced all of our greenhouse gas emissions, we are still going to experience changes from climate change. So adaptation really seeks to, how do we prepare for that going forward? Adaptation strategies are essential for coping with the changes in temperature, precipitation patterns, sea level rise, extreme weather events, and other climate-related hazards. Resiliency is also forward-focused, but specifically looks at proactive measures and approaches aimed at enhancing the capacity of our individuals, communities, campuses, ecosystems, and institutions to anticipate these issues and withstand, recover, and adapt to the impacts of climate change. Resiliency strategies are important for reducing vulnerability, protecting lives and livelihoods, promoting sustainable development, and enhancing adaptive capacity in the face of climate change impacts. So I'm going to go through just a few more examples of each of these. Examples of mitigation strategies include renewable energy transition to solar, wind, and community energy projects, also hydros, energy efficiency, including weatherization and electrification, carbon sinks, referring to maintaining ecosystems to absorb greenhouse gases through afforestation and reforestation, sustainable transportation, such as EV infrastructure, bike lanes, and public transit. I'm going to just pause on transportation because, of course, the city of River Falls does not have a good public transit system outside of a few taxi things. So while I do mention transportation quite a bit, that could also take the forms of even our commuting to work or just running errands or whatever that looks like. So in the sense of transportation, it could be both the individual side of things as well as larger community infrastructure. And for campus, we also look at it as both of those components as well. Advancing sustainable agriculture practices to reduce emissions from farming, and waste reduction and circular economy by reducing consumption, recycling, composting, and reducing single-use plastics. Because both adaptation and resiliency strategies are forward-focused, I loop them together for a lot of the purposes of communicating out a climate action and resiliency plan. So some of the examples of adaptation and resiliency strategies include flood management and stormwater solutions through efforts like green infrastructure, permeable surfaces, rain gardens, and retention ponds. Extreme heat and weather preparedness by having cooling or warming centers available, and tree canopy expansion, which is challenging given Emerald ash borer right now and the number of trees coming down in our community. So that's going to be an important thing looking forward of how we're working to address that. Food security by supporting local food systems and drought resilience, and emergency preparedness and community resilience by adopting resilient infrastructure and having emergency response plans. And I just love this graphic for how it pulls it all together, showing both sides of this, the mitigation and adaptation side and creating resilience. Ultimately, I describe climate action resiliency planning as a two-pronged approach. The one side is the mitigation. How are we reducing our direct contribution to climate change? And then the other side of that is the adaptation and hopefully resilient side and how we're preparing for the future. If we mitigate but do not adapt, or if we adapt but don't address our contributions, all climate-related hazards and impacts will continue to grow and affect us more and more. So why should we pursue this? We know that we have local risks and vulnerabilities. More intense rain events will create more flooding concerns. Warmer winters will create ecological and agricultural shifts and changes in recreation. This year was a little bit better for ice fishing, but if you're a fisherman or woman, you might recall last winter, we basically never had good enough ice to go ice fishing. So things like that are really affecting us locally as well as Wisconsin, especially up north Wisconsin. They're very heavily dependent on the recreational seasons for skiing and things like that. And that is decreasing year after year. And then also increased extreme weather creates infrastructure challenges. Economic and community benefits. Proper planning could result in lower energy costs for residents and businesses. And I don't know about all of you, but I would love lower energy costs. It could attract green businesses and innovation. Tattersall came to River Falls in part because of our sustainability efforts. We could have improved public health, air quality, access to nature, and reduced heat risks. And it could strengthen local agriculture and food security. Our plan can be proactive to align with city and state goals. So that's where we connected again with the Met Council. On the Wisconsin side, it's the Wisconsin Office of Sustainability and Clean Energy. So we actually benefit from, even though we're going to be under the Met Council's metropolitan area report, we also benefit from the knowledge and resources available in Wisconsin. So we can work with that to make sure that our plan aligns with both states. Community engagement and policy development. So we want our plan to include equitable and inclusive planning, ensuring all voices are heard. We want it to pursue financial incentives and funding opportunities through things like grants, rebates, and partnerships. With the hopefully soon to be approved climate action resiliency plan for the university, the immediate reaction that people are going to have is, well, how are we going to do all of this? How are we going to pay for all of that? Ultimately, if we enact some of these things, there will be cost savings. But I also identify our climate action plan as having a set list of goals, and then how we get there is kind of a menu of options. We have many different targets and things that we could pursue, and particularly working within the state of Wisconsin, we could pursue state funding when available, grants, internal funding. There's just a variety of opportunities. So our plan doesn't necessarily say exactly how we're going to get to our goals. It outlines the main broad goals, and then the targets for how we get there are as we have different opportunities and resources available to us in the state. And that would be the same for a broader community plan as well, with different options of how you pursue that. We want the plan to track progress and accountability through publicly accessible reporting, updates, and community dashboards. Most importantly, how can the community get involved? I would encourage you to support policies that promote sustainability, join local advisory committees, city meetings, Hope for Earth, Grow to Share, the Co-op, Kinnickinnick River Land Trust. There's many, many more organizations working on things related to this in our community. Adopt personal sustainability practices such as solar adoption, energy efficiency, waste reduction, and sustainable transportation. There's always this balance when talking about sustainability of individual action versus larger systemic action. And there's people that advocate for one or the other, and the reality is it's going to need to be both. We're going to all need to do things on our part, and we're going to need to work collectively to have that larger systemic change. We can also advocate for city action by contacting officials or speaking during city council public comment meetings, which I know many of you already do. The next steps for the city of River Falls, hopefully city council will be supportive of us developing a climate action plan, and they will call together a committee to work on that, and Hope for Earth is prepared to support those efforts. And then hopefully there will be increased opportunities for additional feedback. So tonight, for those of you in person, you're going to get to provide a whole bunch of feedback for us that will help inform future actions as well. So the call to action is, how will you help shape River Falls' future? There's a number of ways you can do that, and I would encourage you to get involved in whatever way you feel you can. Doing a little bit of a deeper dive into some of the climate hazards, because we've kind of talked about some of these throughout the presentation. When we started looking at different climate hazards that the university or the broader community would experience, we ultimately narrowed it down to 20 climate hazards, which was just too much for us to really adequately address on campus. So we looked at categorizing them, and we ultimately came up with these 9 categories of climate hazards. And these hazards are important. They are exactly what we're going to experience going forward. But the more important piece of this is the impacts that those are going to have on our community. So from those 20 climate hazards, we identified 3 impact areas for each of those, and ultimately ended up with 60 climate impacts. There was some overlapping categories, but ultimately still way too much for us to actually process and be able to move forward. So through some work at the university, we ultimately identified and dropped these down to 10, although then later we dropped this down to 9, different climate impact areas. So these are the things that are actually on those tables over there, and I'll explain that a little bit more further. But we need to understand the climate hazards that we're going to experience, but we really need to know what those impact areas are so we can adequately plan for the future and making sure that we're reducing those impacts. I know this slide is a lot of information, but it's meant to demonstrate the interconnectedness between all of these hazards and impact areas. We only mapped each of those hazards to 3 impact areas initially, and now on this one you can see there's a little bit more, or there's multiple hazards that have the same impact area. So there might be an impact area like food security, although up there it's under oh gosh, I lost it, but it's under food systems. There's more than 3 that different of the hazards that could impact that. So they're all very interconnected, and ultimately working to address one climate hazard could impact multiple areas. So a lot of our conversations on campus have focused around the impact areas, understanding again the hazards, but really focusing on what those impacts will have on our students, our employees, and our broader community. So very interconnected. So key takeaways, and then we'll transition to the engagement around the room. Climate action and resiliency planning is essential for a sustainable, prepared, and economically strong community. A plan should include strategies for reducing emissions as well as adapting to climate impacts, and community participation is going to be crucial in the success of developing a plan that adequately represents our community. So with that, we're going to end the virtual component.